Well, hi everyone. Chris and I are on our road trip as promised, and here we are in lovely Castlemaine, just north of Melbourne on the way to Bendigo, if you're wondering where that is. We're out here to visit Lyn Kelly, who wrote the Memory Code, and it's a book I've mentioned to you regarding Indigenous methods of memory. So I thought probably it's appropriate that we start with an acknowledgement of country. This is we're here at the Castlemaine diggings, and of course Castlemaine's a lovely old gold town, but it's always been the traditional lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people, one of the clans of the Kulin Nation, and it's appropriate that we're here and that we acknowledge their elders, both past, present and future. And what better way to do that than think about the ways in which Indigenous people have encoded their stories, laws and all of their knowledge that they have of country, than come here and think about the ways in which their methods of knowing can inform us in the way that we learn.
Again.
I'm not sure how formal to go, but I can start with, well, we're here with Lyn Kelly in her home in Castlemaine, lovely Castlemaine in Victoria, and we're here to talk about Lyn's work on memory and in particular the relationship between Indigenous knowledges and the way that we might learn and use memory for all the sorts of things that we want to learn. So, hi Lyn.
Hi Meredith.
It's good.
Hi Chris.
Hello there.
You're not there, you're a fly on the wall.
I'm a fly on the wall. Thank you so much for interviewing with us. This is great.
Yeah, we've just had a lovely lunch too.
Mm-hmm.
So Lyn, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about, before we get to all the stuff about memory, how your journey took you towards an interest in memory, because you didn't start off with an interest in memory. Yeah.
I have got an appalling natural memory, and which is why at uni and school I could only do maths and science and physics because I can't remember anything. So I got through as a science computer type person and was doing a book on natural history and how Indigenous stories about animals. And I started realising that they were memorising vast amounts of information. So the Navajos, 700 insects, fully classified. This has been documented by scientists, fully classified, 700, all stored in memory. How the hell did they do it? The Australian Yanyuwa people from Carpentaria, 800 kilometres. They could sing the whole lot, navigate 800 kilometres. I can't find my way down the road. You know? So my question in my PhD that was supposed to be about animal stories was, how the hell do they do it? And so I started working out how the hell they do it.
Yeah.
And realising, despite my appalling natural memory, I can memorise almost anything now. Their methods are so effective, and they're effective the whole world over. All Indigenous cultures use these methods. They've been attributed to the Greeks. That's because...
Yeah.
Well, I think because the human brain's the common factor.
Well, that's probably the thing that students are most familiar with, is this thing that we call the method of loci, which we do attribute to the ancient Greek orators, and the idea being that, you know, if you could memorise a familiar pathway through some familiar space, you could then use that to sort of essentially anchor the sequence of a speech.
Yes.
As you move through the physical space, you're essentially picking up pieces of the speech along the way. So I think, you know, many of us are familiar with that idea. But really, I mean, what are we talking about? 2,000, 2,000 to 5,000 years of that. The Indigenous methods that you've referred to in your book are going back tens of thousands of years.
They all work
and
exactly...
have basically the same principle.
Yeah, so an Aboriginal songline moves through the landscape, location to location. Yeah. So they're doing exactly what the Greeks and Romans did. And I'll set one up here so we can see how the students can do it themselves really easily. But the songlines go location to location, and at each location a ritual is performed. Now, a ritual is just a repeated event. Now, you know, repetition is essential for memory. So it'll be a song or a dance. It's not necessarily spiritual or anything else. Some rituals are to do with how to nap stone, how to find the best stone, how to get water from underground. You know, all these things are repeated in song, dance, story, because these all make it more memorable.
I'd really like to explore the idea of memory spaces and memory palaces a bit more. Again, I think we're sort of all aware that this is something that we could use, but you've actually put these into practice.
Yes, I have thousands of locations.
Can you show us?
If we can look at two that are highly effective and that your students can start using straight away. So if we were, say, going to put in the countries of the world, I do them in population order. There's 242, but we won't do the lot. We'll just start. So if you'd use a room like this, so you enter the front door, that's location 1. The biggest country in the world is China. So we have to associate China with this door. So I'm going to have a delivery of a Chinese meal, or you could get a bit of China and smash it. Whatever works, and your first impression will work best. I do 5 to a room. Oh, I do 10 up to the window, but 5 probably works better. And the Greeks and Roman orators would mark every 5th location on their diagrams with a hand. That's why I was doing that.
Right.
Because it allows you to get a rhythm in them and always know how far you are from anywhere. So there's China.
Right.
Next is India. So how far am I going round? Because I've got 10 in here, so it's very confusing. Okay, so we did India there. So how would you associate India? Frankly, under there is an entire Bollywood production going on.
Right.
Can you see it? If you can't use your imagination, and imagination is critical to this, the stupider, the wider, and you will get used to doing it. Bollywood production happening under there. There's India. The third is United States. There's Chris's chair. Do you know who's sitting there now?
I certainly hope it's not Trump.
It is.
Oh, no.
You have just ruined this room forever. Donald Trump is now sitting there. You get that image in your head.
Because we moved that chair there for Chris, that's Trump's chair, is it?
Yes.
Oh, goodness.
It's all right. I've got USA up there.
But he's out of place at the moment. Is that a problem?
Not for me, no, because I'm not actually encoding now.
Okay.
I'm just showing you the method.
Right.
So I started a massive prehistory and history memory palace that goes right around the block, so a couple of kilometres long. And I start 4,500 years ago at the front wall, which is the Hadean. Do you realise it took me 5 years before I realised I had Hadean and a wall and didn't call it Hadean's wall? How stupid. Anyway, so I start here, and then as we walk, and we're now walking through history. So we've got Rome being founded. Looks like Rome, don't you think? Yeah. The letterbox is Pythagoras. There's that tree is Confucius and Buddha, and over at the ivy is Herodotus. Now I can't get the order wrong because they're physically grounded.
One thing I'm observing as you're describing your experience of the geography and of the features is that this is a really feature-rich environment. So if you were in a more bland environment that didn't have very salient, obvious features that you could anchor a memory onto, I imagine that would be more difficult to work with.
Not a lot. There's no such thing if you look at it closely. Let's just choose a bit of stone. Say all you had was that bit of stone. Now start looking at it closely. You've got this, you'll find things in it because the brain is a pattern-making device. So if you want to find, say, an elephant, there you are, there's an elephant with a trunk.
I've got the trunk.
You've got the elephant in the trunk. You will manage to get anything, anywhere. Look at the ground. There's so much stuff there on that bit of ground.
And is this what you see also in these sorts of Indigenous memory systems? You see that there can be very small, seemingly very subtle features that can actually have profound meaning.
The Aboriginal people know all the really subtle stars, not just the big constellations. They will use some of the tiniest, subtlest things and use them. And if we're going to look very abstract, let's go back and look at the handheld devices.
I was going to say, this brings us really nicely to the idea that, you know, you can actually bring this down to a portable memory space as well. So one thing I'm really conscious of here is that we're not just walking through a physical space, we're actually walking through pathways in your mind, and I'm just wondering how that feels.
Well, my whole space here, I've got about 10 kilometres of songlines and this house is absolutely full of stuff, is that I am so emotionally attached. Mm-hmm. You probably saw I got sort of all a bit edgy because all my characters were trying to talk. This landscape is alive. Mm-hmm. It's mine. Can you imagine? I've just done this myself over a few years. Can you imagine if I had grown up and those stories I was learning and those characters I was meeting had been handed down generation after generation after generation? I had a totemic, and then along comes a coloniser and puts a fence across and says, you can't go there.
So this is getting to this idea of country, which we find so difficult to understand, but just showing us what you have here in terms of your knowledge being embedded in this landscape, it gives an appreciation for how you could become so much a part of the landscape.
I've only glimpsed this, and it's heartbreaking now when I think about what was done, because for me not to be able to go to my locations would really upset me. I get edgy when people, not walking through it with permission, but some people, your attachment, and we took that away, and they moved all the reason I work with the Pueblo in America is they're the one culture, the group of languages that were not moved off their land. The rest were moved onto reservations, and they called it the Walk of Tears, and they said, but this is better country. They took away their entire landscape, knowledge system, destroyed all their books effectively.
Yes, it's like it's akin to book burning, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
Yes.
And it's the cruel, intellectual cruel. I mean, we were physically, not we personally, I mean, the colonisers were physically cruel, but they were also unbelievably intellectually cruel.
This is culturally and intellectually cruel, I'm getting a sense of that.
But if we can look at these physical devices, so if you take, all Indigenous cultures do this, they encode to objects. So this is an Australian Aboriginal coolamon, a food dish, but on the back, these are not random etchings. This is one's over 100 years old from the Western Desert, and I was given custodianship because you can't own these objects by a Warlpiri woman, Nungarai. And it was unbelievably emotional. Now, I'm the author of The Skeptic's Guide to the Paranormal. You're talking to a hardcore skeptical person. And she told me about the power of these objects. And I didn't understand, but once you start encoding something like the landscape, it gains a power. We don't have the English words to describe it. It would be wrong of me to encode that because that is a real one. So I have had a copy made, different size, and the markings aren't exactly the same, to learn. And you can encode, I'm doing different habitats around here, and the eucalypts and the wattles and so on. And you can encode to all these weird shapes. It's unbelievable. I would never have believed it. But the way I found this out, this is what all your students can do. This is a copy, the beads are designed my way, but the size, shape, everything, of an African Lhasa by the Luba people from West Africa. And that's been really thoroughly documented as a memory board, used for memorising a whole stack of information. And at this stage of my research, I thought, well, sorry, I'm a skeptic. I do not believe you can encode a whole stack of information to a bit of wood with beads and shells shoved on it.
Yeah.
So I grabbed a bit of wood. They were making the veranda out the back at the time. So I grabbed a bit of the wood and just glued beads on. Didn't even know what I was going to encode, and started encoding the birds of Victoria because I'm married to a birder. I like spiders, you've probably worked out. He likes birds, so I thought I'd be nice to him, even though they do eat my spiders. And I started encoding. So I got the taxonomic order, because you may as well have more information. The alphabetic order doesn't teach you anything. Right. So I started with the first one. There was a bead there. You can feel it. It's as sharp as anything. Right. The bead fell off, but it's the emu. No, and the emu has a sharp beak, and so I left the bead off. That's emu. This one's the duck. See, there's a little tiny speck there, the anatidae. the duck family. I sing it, and I won't sing now for your sake. And that's a little tail wagging. There's 16 ducks, so I then have to make a story. Now, the first one, there's the magpie goose, and about 5 in there's the swan. So I decided to have a story about the magpies and the swans in a footy match. Right. I've got the chestnut and the grey teal. They're the tea ladies that come out. The shovelers digging the grave because there's a huge blue goes on. We eventually, the musk duck's put on his musk colognes over in the bushes. We won't talk about what he's doing over in the bushes. No. The hardhead's bashing up people, so we get a blue billed and a pink eared, and the shovelers burying them all. So once you get a story like that, and you're laughing, and my images, I can see it all going on, you will...
But that's all going on in this bead.
That story, I've linked to that bead. Not instantly, it took me a while, and you replay the story, and then it just grows. And so I've got all the beads. So when I got to the little pipit, I was round to here, it's family Motorcylidae. I saw that looks like a motor car. This little one, that little group of beads. So that's Motorcylidae. I could do that with all of them.
It's just striking me as we're talking about these Indigenous ways of knowing and remembering that there's a lot of insights we could gain just from thinking about the way this all works to inform us about how we think currently about memory. So in talking about song and dance and ritual as being ways of making information, quite abstract information, more memorable, it seems to me that we've got, evidence for two complementary learning systems here. So, and I'm not... there'll be a whole lot of research there, it strikes me, in terms of looking at not just the way that we currently carve up memory in terms of declarative and non-declarative, but thinking of how these two systems might work together. So the declarative memory system is all the conceptual and language-based knowledge that is consciously retrievable to us. But then we've got all these other systems of memory that are much more unconscious, much more implicit, that involve things like singing and dance and all the things that we can encode in
muscle memory
in very different ways.
Yeah.
But with these two things working together, we have a very powerful set of complementary systems that,
enhance each other.
Yeah.
And what I've been looking at recently for my new book, Unlocking the Memory Code, is that there's a transition. So as you get into classical times where they were still using these all the time, medieval times when they were using them, but writing was starting to get around a lot more, the medieval manuscripts are laid out in order to make them memorable because there were so few of them. So they do dirty little pictures, drolleries, little rude pictures around the edges and fancy lettering and neat notes where every page looks the same will not be memorable. Lay them out in grids and all sorts of things. As you get into the Renaissance, they used fancy alphabets, and I use a visual alphabet as a memory tool. And gradually it changed. And now it's mostly memory champions. I am the Australia's senior memory champion. I entered the competition last year, memorising cards. Well, there's not a lot of people do it. Shuffle decks of cards and numbers and everything. And what you have to do is make all of those, give them the numbers, characters, which is where my characters come from. Each of the cards have to be a character, and then you plonk images of things in memory palaces. But why is it memory champions only using it? Why aren't we all doing it?
And using it for something more interesting than memorising decks of cards as well.
And more useful. Yeah. Little kids sing their alphabets.
Yes.
And then we stop doing that. Why?
I know, I agree with you. My son never learned his alphabet. I was horrified because they didn't sing it.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
Oh, I'm singing my Chinese alphabet. I will not sing for you. And my French alphabet. I've found the best way to start in languages is get on YouTube and find the little kids' songs. Ni hao, ni hao. Yeah. And that's getting me the in. And then we stop doing that. We get all serious and do nice, neat notes and Don't doodle on your notes. Why not? So I think that we can learn massive amounts from these Indigenous methods without giving up anything that we already do.
Yeah. Yes.
And have fun and make up all sorts of stories. Because the human brain makes up stories. If they're not there, it's going to make them up anyway.
Fascinating.
It's fun.
Wonderful. This is a book I recommended to you just before we started our lectures, and it's a great pleasure to be here with Lynne today to talk about the memory code and the methods that are described in here to help you remember everything you've learned this semester.